Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Bottom Rung. With me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And today we are doing chapter 15. Did you hear? Someone yelled as they entered the mess hall. A team made it out of the dungeon without losing anyone. The silence that had begun to fall over the occupied table, a quarter, quartered, a quarter of the room broke. Not a piece of news that was, not a piece of news that was, not a piece of news that was, that's not a piece of news that surprised Tibs. Everyone was getting more powerful, and almost everyone had an element based on the color of their eyes, so it was bound to happen at some point. The announcer looked around. She was a woman, her clothing in better condition than most. More and more of the rogues knew about the secret cubbies, so the quality of the clothing the surviving runners wore had gone up. Some even wore magical shirts or pants, providing a little more armor. She frowned as the conversation went back to full force. They got to keep almost all the loot they found. The tent fell silent, everyone looking at her. She nodded, and conversation exploded, filled with new energy. Now they all knew what the incentive to keep the other party member alive was. Tibbs also realized it would affect how teams formed, encourage people to create theirs instead of letting them be randomly assigned by the adventurers. If the goal was for everyone to survive, they'd want the right mix of abilities and experience. People look at each other over the tent. They looked right over Tibbs, but now it might no longer be because of his short size, but because of his eyes. Those who had their elements had no interest in settling themselves with someone without theirs. Close to 2 dozen of the occupants had normal eyes. Tibbs wished he could tell those ignoring him they were wrong. His eyes weren't indicative of a lack of element, but even those who'd seen him train, no, especially those, ignored him. He trained alone, since Alistair had been busy with guild work, and tried to do more than summon a little water before he was out of breath. Even his ice balls were more pebbles, and throwing one left him panting hard. Because he didn't get tired if he kept the water in contact with him, the last thing he'd done under Alistair's watchful eyes was spread it over his arm and then over his hand and then his arm, coating it in a thin film. Tibbs hadn't thought much of it, but Alistair smiled. This will help ensure you survive to do more. He looked around. Surviving, as everyone ignored him, wasn't fun. The humor hit him as someone called his name. He'd spent his time on the street doing everything he could to be ignored, and now he was unhappy about it. Tibbs Lightfinger, the adventurer called, adding the extra part this time. Tibbs groaned and stood. Had Bardic told everyone about it? You Tibbs? He asked as he approached. He nodded. Grab your gear. You have a team waiting for you to enter a dungeon. Tibbs ran out. He had a team. He wasn't giving them a chance to change their mind, and it wasn't like he had gear to collect. Tibbs stopped as the adventurer who handed him the shirt and knife indicated a group of 4. Tibbs had expected at least one of them to be someone he knew. It had been how it happened the previous time. Did it mean none of his last team had survived? He watched those strangers as he approached, putting on the shirt. A woman, a fighter by the sword she held, noticed him, and her bright eyes widened. Oh, they can't be serious. She looked him over. What's the big idea saddling us with a kid, and one without an element? Still the attitude, the man next to her said. Another fighter, shorter than her, but more muscular. Are you Tibbs? He asked, ignoring her glare. His eyes were the reddish brown of those who had earth as their element. Yes, he answered hesitatingly. Good. He smiled. I asked for you. Arch told me about you. You what? The woman demanded. Who's Arch? Tibbs asked, trying to remember who he could have met by that name. That's not his name. Sorry. He was an archer from before I graduated. I didn't really bother with names back then. This tall, nice guy, like he was your brother or best friend. Oh, Tibbs smiled. How is he? I haven't. The fighter's face fell. He didn't make it out of that run. Got blindsided by the rock rabbit. Anyway, I'm Jackal. I'm a nerf fighter. That's. Are you okay? Tibbs nodded, swallowing the pain. Another person he'd known dead. He wished he would stop dying, or that he could stop getting, or that he could stop getting attached. That's Claudia. She's a firefighter. Over there is Walter, a water sorcerer, and I'm not kidding about the name. The sorcerer rolled his eyes. And the lovely lady is Zarkane, a wood archer. Tibbs will be our rogue. Arch says he has an eye for detail and that any team would be lucky to have him. Tibbs straightened. Pride at someone saying good. Wait, what? Pride at someone saying good about him. Saying something good about him, raising his spirit. If you hadn't picked it up, Zardane said, Jack fancies himself our leader. Jackal, please. The fighter replied, Jack's just some common name everyone and their sisters can have. He grinned. Jackal, now that's dignified. Claudia shook her head in annoyance. You have clearly no. Listen up, an approaching adventurer called to them. Since the five of you are Epsilon, things are going to work differently. Walter looked at Tibbs, surprised, but before he could speak, the adventure continued. This one time, you get to pick the equipment you'll use. You can use the standard crap you've been getting, and if your whole team returns, you get to keep it along with everything you find minus the usual 10%. Your other alternative is to get a guild quality version and pay it back over your next runs. In that case, we take half your cut until it's paid off. Jekyll raised his sword. Couldn't we have been told that before we got everything handed? I'm telling you now. You want to decide or not? Do we at least get to see what's on offer before we decide? Claudia asked. The adventurer smiled. Of course. We wouldn't expect less from a discerning adventurer. He led them to another table, and Tibbs looked for Bardic. If he got to pick something, he was the only person he trusted to help him, but the older rogue wasn't around. The armor they offered was hardened leather, and the weapons seemed to be only undamaged version of what they already had. The man behind the table placed a smaller armor on it. We even have something that'll fit you, he told Tibbs. The buckle's at play, so it could be made to fit properly. Go on, put it on. It's the best you can find. The words put Tibbs on edge, and Bardic's warning came back. Should he trust that man just because he was older and more experienced? What was even guild quality? Another thing that hadn't been mentioned. And another thing that hadn't been mentioned. How much? He asked, picking up the knife. It looked like the worn one he was given, but it was lighter, the balance was better, and this one had an edge. It's half what you find from each run until it's paid off, the man said. But how much do I have to pay off? He asked. He knew how scammers worked. The street was filled with them. The smile the man gave him was filled with condescension. Don't you worry, that little mind of yours. We'll keep track of that for you. Claudia smiled. Oh, I so want to hear the excuse you'll give me when I ask how much I'm going to pay for this. She put the armor and sword before the man. He fixed his gray eyes on her. Are you implying the guild would try to swindle you, young lady? She leaned on the table. Buddy, where I come from, I kick guys in the nuts for calling me that. Are you or aren't you going to answer Tibbs's question? How much is this going to cost? The adventurer looked like he'd rather be elsewhere, then finally said, Each set is 100 silver. Tibbs stared, then looked around to try to get a sense of how much more than he imagined 100 was. And silver? How did anyone get silver? Then he remembered the silver they'd found at the bottom of the warren. So maybe it wasn't as impossible as he thought it was. That sounds like a lot, Zarkane said, looking over the armor before her. I can't speak to most of this stuff, but and definitely not about the amulet. But while the leatherwork on this is decent, my dad would be beheaded if he tried to sell it for more than a handful of silver. Young, the adventurer stopped at the glare the archer gave him. Miss, the guild can control how little armor goes for where you're from, but here 100 silver for that, the bow and the arrows is fair value. And this is a one-time offer, right? Jekyll asked, putting the armor down. We don't take it now, and it's never coming back. We're going to have to let the merchant fleece us. Exactly, the adventurer exclaimed. I'm glad one of you understand the privilege you're being offered here. And what do you say, Tibs? Jekyll asked, and Tibs just stared at the man for a few seconds, too surprised to form words. Where I come from, he finally said, turning to address the adventurer. That's the street, he clarified for Jekyll. You don't take the first offer on anything, especially not when there's no one around selling the same thing. Wise word, Jekyll said, before the adventurer could respond. So, what do you say to a little haggling? The adventurer straightened. The guild doesn't haggle. Straight rule it is. The fighter answered. I'll pass. He pushed the armor away. I wouldn't pay half that for armor like this, as Arcane said, and if it's indicative of what you to expect, the bow isn't worth it either. How certain are you? Walter looked from Tibs to Jekyll. I've looked in town and no one sells charge stones. Tibs bit his lower lips. Were they right to go by his experience? I'm not going to tell you what to do, Walter. Jekyll said, his tone understanding, but I agree with Tibs. Street rules. It's never a good idea to buy from the person who owns the market. But if there's no one else, the adventurer said, grinning, what else can you do? You aren't helping your case, Walter said. Took the amulet and sighed. But I don't have a choice. The free one isn't going to do me any good now that I have an element. I know that just from touching it. This has a deeper reserve and it's made for actual essence, not whatever the other one contains. Jekyll placed the silver on the table. If you feel that it's that important, get it. I'll help you pay it back. Jack, you can't. It's Jekyll, please. And the only way we get to keep the loot we find is if we all survive. That's going to be a lot harder if you don't have access to your element, which is what it sounds like. It sounds, you said, the crappy amulet would cause. My element means I'm not going to need armor or the sword, so I can spare the coins. Claudia placed a silver coin next to Jekyll. You're right. I made it through all my runs with crappy armor and sword. I have my element now. I'm in, Zarkane said, putting a coin down. You better not die, Walter, otherwise I am going to be pissed. Tibs looked at the coin and closed his hand on the roll in his pocket. He couldn't decide what to do. Walter was going to die, he just knew it. Was it worth giving coin if there was no doubt of that? Only now they had an element that made them more powerful. Maybe more powerful than the dungeon? If Walter died because Tibs hadn't helped, or even if he survived, would they want him to stay on the team? Teams were supposed to help one another. Then, when he noticed the fighter looking at him, he made his decision and realized he had another problem. He motioned to a spot away from the others. Jekyll, can we talk? Don't let him pressure you into buying it just yet, the fighter told Walter. Followed Tibs until they were out of easy earshot. What's up? Are you going to be insulted if I say what's down? Tibs shook his head. Look, Tibs, if you don't have to help if you don't have the. How much copper is a silver worth? He asked in a whisper, glancing to make sure no one was paying attention. Jekyll looked at him. You don't know? Tibs shook his head. I've never seen a whole coin before here. And you mean copper, right? Wow. And I always thought I was straight as it got. Just where are you from, Tibs? Tibs shrugs. Didn't you ask the merchants? Have you looked at what they sell? You have looked at what they sell, right? I bought a needle. I've been keeping the rest until I know what to do with it. I want to help. I want to be part of the team, but I just have copper. If I don't have enough, you have the extra the extra copper. I can give it back to you back after the run. There's silver in the warren. I don't remember how many, but even with whatever the 10% is, I'll be able to repay it, right? He asked hopefully. Jekyll looked thoughtful. You know, I hadn't even thought about the warrants. But you said that us surviving was the only way to keep all the loot. Yeah, but I was only thinking about the copper. Keeping most of them adds up a lot faster than just one or two. Tibs narrowed his eyes at the man. What kind of street are you from that money isn't the most important thing? How do you pay for your food if you don't steal it? Jekyll smiled. Tibs, I'm a fighter. I kick and I punch for a living. When I win, I don't have to worry about paying for my meals. When I lose, I'm in too bad a shape to care about food. Tibs nodded. So how much for a silver? Here it's 15 coppers to a silver. The guild enforces it. Elsewhere, where your copper is from will affect how much it takes. Tibs pushed a Y, that could be. Copper was copper after all, away, and took out his roll, handing it to Jekyll. I don't know what's 15. Unsure there would be enough in the roll, he broke the thread that at the hem of his pant legs and took the 3 copper there and the 5 he had stitched inside his shirt. Jekyll grinned as Tibs handed them. You hiding any more elsewhere? Tibs narrowed his eyes. You try to find out and you'll lose a hand. He relaxed when the fighter didn't do anything. Don't you hide your coins? Jekyll snorted. No one I know is that smart, least of all me. He returned 2 of the coppers to Tibs along with the piece of cloth. The rest he placed next to the silver. Then, when they returned, that's 4 silver right there to pay for Walter's amulet. 4 against 100. The adventurer took out a hand-sized book and a trim piece of charcoal. I just want the amulet, Walter said, not the robe. It's a kit. He made a note in his book. So what you're saying, Jekyll said, is that the guild would rather get nothing rather than 50 silver? The adventurer sighed, looked up from his book. You're going to be troubled, aren't you? I'm just looking out for both our interests. Walter needs the amulet, and the guild clearly must need the coins if you're pushing that hard. What do you say? I'm pretty sure those amulets aren't as hard for you to get as they're going to be for Walter. 50, the man said reluctantly, with 4 paid down. He wrote in the book, and as he closed it, Claudia took it from him. She read from it and handed it back. It's what it says. You can read? Jekyll asked, sounding impressed. You're the one who's straight. I got an education before the guys got too grabby and I had to teach them a lesson. That's what got me sent here. Jekyll stepped back and bowed to her. Milady, remind me never to get on your bad side. Keep your hands to yourself and you're good. Jekyll put his hand in his pocket. No worries there. If you're done having fun, the adventurer said, grab what's yours and head back to the hill. It's going to be your turn soon. Walter took the amulet, holding it reverently, while Jekyll put the sword he'd been holding on the table. If using this isn't mandatory anymore, I don't need it, he told the adventurer. Tibs? Walter spoke in a low voice as they headed to the bottom of the hill. What's your element? I've never seen one that shade of brown. It's water, he said, and readied himself for the objections the few runners training with it water would ask. It's water, he said, and readied himself for the objections the few runner training with water would ask him gave. Instead, the sorcerer just looked at him. My teacher said it's because I'm so young. It also means I can't do a lot. I don't want you to think I can flood the rats away. Walter smiled. Even I can't do that yet. He rejoined the others and they rejoined the others and waited for their turn into the dungeon. That concludes chapter 15 of Bottom Rung. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is available on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me and read the story ahead, that's on my Patreon. We're about 9 chapters ahead at this point. And if you want to listen to these happening live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.